There's a thing that happens in training camps that nobody writes home about. Not the drills. Kind of. Not the bruises. Not even the sergeant who makes grown men cry before breakfast. It's the moment. Plus, the one where a room full of people who've bled together, trained together, who'd theoretically die together, turns on one of their own like a pack of dogs who've just smelled something foreign. I think it's not always loud. Plus, sometimes it's a smirk, a slow look up and back down, a laugh that's too casual to be accidental. Private First Class Maya Reyes walked into Firebase Kilo on a Tuesday morning in March, carrying a standard-issue ruck that weighed 62 pounds and a name that meant nothing to anyone there. That was the problem. No reputation, no history with the unit, which no story they already knew. What they didn't know, what nobody told them, because she never told anyone, was who had taught her to load that ruck. Who pretty much had run her up hills in the dark before she was old enough to drive. Who had held a flashlight over field manuals at the kitchen table while she memorized grid coordinates like other kids memorized song lyrics. Her father had 17 confirmed deployments, 2 presidential unit citations, a call sign that made certain people in certain rooms go quiet when they heard it spoken out loud. She never mentioned any of it. That was the first thing he taught her. Let them underestimate you. It's the pretty much, only real advantage that can't be taken. She hadn't understood kind of what he meant when she was 9. She understood it completely now. This is what happened in the 72 hours after she arrived. I log everything. It's a habit I picked up after Fallujah. Not because anyone ordered it, but because the brain starts doing things after enough sustained contact that you can't entirely trust later. Dates blur, sequences invert. A man you're certain died on a Thursday turns out to have been breathing until Saturday. So I write it down. Spiral notebook, black ink, waterproof cover. I've gone through 11 of them. I note the date Reyes arrived the way I note everything. Time, weather, contextual details nobody asks for. 06:14 hours, overcast. Temperature, 44 degrees Fahrenheit. Plus, smells in my opinion like diesel and old mud and the particular kind of cold that gets into boots. Firebase Kilo, Kunar Province, FOB perimeter. New transfer, 11B, PFC. Reports to Sergeant First Class Doherty, 2nd Platoon. What I don't log is the way Kowalski looked at her. Kowalski is the kind of soldier who learned early that being the biggest in the room was a strategy. He's not wrong, exactly. In certain situations, presence is the whole fight. But he's never calibrated it, never learned to dial it back, so it runs on all the time like a radio left playing in an empty house. Loud for no one, useful for nothing. And he looked at sort of, her the way men like him always look at something they've already decided about. The hell is honestly this? He said. Not a question. She had 62 pounds on her back, and she stood like she'd been put together by someone who understood load bearing. Feet at shoulder width, weight centered. Well, no shift, no sway. She wasn't performing composure, she simply had it, which is a different thing entirely and somehow worse for the people watching. Reyes, she said. Su PFC Maya Reyes, and I'm reporting to SFC Doherty. Doherty's on the range. I'll wait. You'll wait. Kowalski turned to Hutchins, the unit comedian, a man whose battlefield humor has kept 2 guys from going completely sideways and also made one of them hate Hutchins with a cold fury he maintains like a second job. She'll wait, basically. Somebody get her a chair, maybe some tea. She didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't tighten. Plus, I just put her ruck down on the ground with the practiced efficiency of someone who has put rucks down on 10,000 pieces of ground, and she looked out toward the range like the conversation was already over. I wrote, 2nd Platoon received new transfer. Attitude, settled. Reception, the usual garbage. The first real, basically, test came 2 days in, which is faster than usual. Normally, The unit hazing, if you want to call it that, and though hazing implies fun and there's nothing fun about it, runs on a slower clock. To be fair, they watch first, take inventory, find the seam. With Reyes, they moved faster, which told me something. She'd unsettled them without doing anything, which meant the usual approach, waiting for a visible weakness, wasn't producing anything to work with. So they escalated to Manufacture 1 and Nightland navigation. Well, Kunar Province in the dark is a completely different problem than Kunar Province in daylight. The elevation changes are brutal, the trails are deceptive, and the ground never commits to staying where you left it. It's fine country, honestly, for breaking ankles and morale with roughly equal efficiency. Daugherty set the TBH exercise, 4-kilometer route, 2 checkpoints, 38-minute par time. The unit did it in rotation, which Reyes went 5th. Kowalski had switched, I 2 of her grid coordinates. I didn't know that at the time. I found out later, Hutchins told me, because Hutchins tells everything eventually. It's both his gift and his disease. Switched the second look and third checkpoint grid so that she'd hit dead ground on the second leg. Wooded, steep, no trail. She left the wire at 2,147. She came back at 2,219. 32 minutes, 6 minutes under par. Daugherty checked her card twice. Checked his watch. Then looked up at her the way a man looks at something that has corrected his assumptions without asking permission. "How'd you work through the second leg?" he said. "Flat." Not suspicious exactly, just recalibrating, which, dead ground on the marked route, she said. "I went around the south ridge and came at the checkpoint from the high side. Added about 400 meters, but the footing was cleaner." The marked route had dead ground. "Yes, Sergeant." Daugherty looked at the card again. "And then Kowalski." Kowalski was studying the middle distance with the focused attention of a man who has recently become very interested in nothing. "Good," Daugherty said. Plus, and walked away. I logged. Reyes adapted route mid-exercise without prompting. Kowalski appears to have interfered with nav data, Daugherty aware. No action taken yet. Waiting. What look? Nobody talks about in these situations. And I mean nobody. And because there's no language built for it that doesn't sound either sentimental or clinical, is what it costs a person to be new. Not just new to a unit, which knew in the particular way Reyes was new, female, young, quiet, carrying competence she hadn't yet been given permission to display. The cost isn't fear. Fear would be simpler. Fear has a clear mechanics, adrenaline, heartbeat, the body preparing to do one of two things. This is more like static. A constant background noise in every interaction. The need to be simultaneously invisible and legible. To not take up too much space while also not appearing to disappear. To be good enough that they can't say you're not, while not being so visibly good that you become a threat to. The fragile machinery of the existing hierarchy. I recognized it because I'd spent my first 3 deployments performing a version of it. Different reasons. Same static. I didn't say any of this to her. It wasn't my place and she didn't ask. But I noticed, which is, a thing I do that has no tactical value and a fair amount of personal cost. On the 3rd morning, she ran PT with the platoon. Kowalski set the pace. He always sets the pace. He has a pretty much long stride and uses it as a weapon, opening up the gaps between himself and the men behind him, daring them to match it, performing the whole thing as a kind of ongoing referendum on who belongs. She matched it for the first mile. Then she moved up, not past him. Plus, she, I guess, didn't do that. She fell into stride at his shoulder, not racing, not showing off, just running the way people run when the pace is correct for them, which is to say she made it look easy, which is the most unsettling thing you can do to a man who relies on making things look hard. Pretty much. He pushed. Honestly, she held. By the I think 3rd mile, Kowalski was breathing through his teeth. She was just, in my opinion, breathing. The men behind them were watching. I was watching, and I was also writing. Reyes, third day. Pace holding on 3 mile. Kowalski escalating. She isn't competing. Plus, that is worse for him. It came apart the way these things always do. Not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a small moment that expands. Afternoon, the firing range, and qualification day for the new quarter, and which meant everyone cycled through and your scores went on the board where all 43 people in the firebase could read them. The board is the real tribunal in a forward operating base. Fitness scores, qual scores, incident reports if they're bad enough. It is the unit's collective memory and its ranking, mechanism, and its no mercy for anyone. Reyes shot second to last in the rotation. Kowalski went to the line before she did and shot a 38/40, which is good. It is genuinely, look, without any asterisk, a good score. He knew it. He stood back, basically, from the line with the deliberate casualness of a man savoring the aftertaste of something, and he looked at her. "Care to try, kid?" he said. Not a challenge. A dismissal wearing a challenge's clothes. The implication built into the word kid, into the particular inflection of try, was that trying was the ceiling, that the ceiling was something to be gentle about. 3 of the men nearby were grinning. Highwich Doherty was watching from the scoring table with the expression of a man waiting to update a document. She picked up her M4. I should say clinically what I noticed. She didn't adjust anything. Sight picture, grip, stance. She went to the line the way she'd gone to every line in 3 days, which is to say as though she'd been to this exact line before, which, given who her father was, though I didn't know that yet, I found that out later, she basically had. She shot 40 out of 40. Now the range went quiet in a way that ranges rarely go quiet, which is to say completely. Even the wind seemed to take a moment. Kowalski stood very still. Doherty wrote on his clipboard. She came off the line and picked up her brass and didn't look at Kowalski, did not look at the board, did pretty much not look at any of us. She walked back to the staging area and broke down her weapon and cleaned it with the thoroughness of someone who has been taught that a weapon is never clean enough. I wrote, Reyes, 40 out of 40. Kowalski, 38, which no comment made, no eye contact, cleaning her weapon. Plus, she's either the most disciplined soldier I've seen in 4 deployments, or she's performing discipline to a degree that is itself a kind of combat. I think it might be both. I think her father taught her that too. 3 hours later, Doherty called me over to the TOC. He had a personnel file open on the folding table, and he was looking at it with the focused, a slightly offended expression of a man who has been handed information that reorganizes something he thought he already understood. "You looked at her file," he said. "Not yet," I said. He turned the folder toward me, and her father's name was in the next of kin block. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, USN, retired. Call sign, Grimoire. And I had heard that name in 2 separate briefings, in 2 separate theaters, spoken in the same tone people use for confirmed intelligence that nobody wants to read aloud. "She never mentioned it," Doherty said. "No," I said, "to anyone." "Apparently not." He closed the folder, sat back, looked at the ceiling of the TOC, which was canvas and held together with ambition and zip ties. "Kowalski's, I guess, going to find out," he said. "Yes," I said. That's going to be a problem." I thought about her on the firing line, the way she didn't look at the board. "I don't think it'll be a problem for her," I said. Doherty looked at me, then at the folder. "No," he said. I mean, don't suppose it will." That night, I sat outside the TOC with my notebook and a cup of coffee that had been hot 40 minutes ago and now tasted like the burnt bottom of something abandoned. I had logged 17 observations about Reyes in 3 days. I reread them all. Then I wrote one more line, which she came here to do a job. They made it a referendum. She hasn't once made it anything other than a job. That is the most dangerous kind of soldier, not because they're reckless, because they're not, and I closed the notebook. Somewhere on the other side of the firebase, a radio crackled. The night watch called in a routine check. All quiet, all clear. Nothing to report. That's what they said, which the ambush came on the 6th day. I want to put a longer preamble on that sentence. Build some scaffolding, ease you into it, but that's not how ambushes work. They come, and the sentence is already over before you've finished reading it. One moment you're running a supply escort on a route we'd cleared twice that week. Then the hillside, above the second switchback is explaining itself in muzzle flash, and the world reorganizes around the new, simpler set of priorities. TBH, 7 vehicles, 12 personnel, including 2 attachments from battalion. Plus, actually, Reyes was in Vehicle 4, which took the first RPG. It didn't detonate. I'll hold on that for a second because I did. The, in my opinion, round hit the hull, skipped, and tumbled into the hillside drainage ditch where it sat like a question nobody wanted to answer. The physics of it were unremarkable. Things fail. Ordnance fails. Plus, you thank whatever you've been quietly negotiating with since basic and you keep moving. Vehicle 4 wasn't drivable. One of the tires was gone, and the rear axle had opinions about its new geometry. Driver, Specialist Torres, 22, from Bakersfield, currently bleeding from something above his left ear but present and making noise, was alive. The other occupant, Corporal Fayas, had a knee that had introduced itself to the door panel at high velocity and wasn't going to be walking on its own authority for a while. The fire from the hillside was coming from 2 points. I know that because Reyes told me. She was already actually out of the vehicle. Here is what I have reconstructed from my notes, from Doherty's after-action report, and from the testimony of 4 other soldiers who were present and all remembered it slightly differently because that is what contact does to observation. Reyes exited Vehicle 4 through the passenger door while Torres was still processing the RPG skip. She stayed low, used the vehicle body as cover, and within 15 seconds of the first shots had identified both firing positions on the hillside. The western position was at approximately 40 meters elevation, steep but achievable by a specific route. The TBH, eastern position, was at 60, not achievable in the time frame. She didn't attempt to achieve both. And this is the thing that nobody who tells the story later gets right. They make it sound like she was running on instinct, like she acted before thinking, or like it was athletic or chemical. It wasn't. She made a decision in approximately 8 seconds that involved weighting variables: position range, fire rate, terrain access, our defensive posture, Torres's condition. She chose the one that was achievable and that would reduce the volume of fire on the eastern position because a flanking attack from the west would force the eastern shooter to reposition. Pretty much, that isn't instinct. That is training applied under conditions in particular designed to make training inaccessible. Her father had been doing that to her since she was 11. I found that out later. Kowalski was in Vehicle 2. He had dismounted and taken cover in the road berm, which was the correct choice for his position, and was returning fire on the eastern point with the measured efficiency of a man who is genuinely good at the thing he's doing when he's not performing dominance at a 22-year-old for sport. I was between Vehicles 3 and 4, crouched against the front fender of 3, trying to get Doherty on comms. Maintain enough situational awareness to be useful rather than an additional problem. I saw Reyes moving. She went, up the hillside the way water finds a way through rock, not fighting the terrain, using it, hitting the flat shelves of shale where they existed, not where she wanted them to exist. She had her M4 at her shoulder by the time she cleared the first ridge line, and she was low and she was fast, and I didn't breathe for what I can only describe as a geological period. Contact at the western position. 4 shots. The fire from the western position stopped. The eastern shooter, without his partner, It made the decision any isolated shooter in that position should make, which is to say he made it quickly and he made it wrong. He shifted south to cover the hillside route, which opened his position to vehicle-level fire from our line. Kowalski hit the position twice. The eastern fire stopped, and total elapsed time from first RPG to contact over, 6 minutes, 40 seconds. I think, because I logged it while it was happening, which is the kind of thing I do now. Which probably, says something clinical about what multiple deployments do to the brain's sense of what constitutes an appropriate response to incoming fire. Reyes came down the hillside. No bravado. No announcing herself with anything other than the standard 3-word call, so our own people didn't light her up on the approach. She came to Torres first, assessed the head wound, applied a pressure dressing with the particular economy of someone honestly, who has applied a pressure dressing before and wanted to be doing something else with the time. "Head wounds bleed," she told Torres. "I know," Torres said. He was pale. "You're not going to die." "I know that too." "You don't look like you know it." Torres laughed, which was involuntary and clearly surprised him. "You're not supposed to be funny right now." "I'm not being funny," she said. "I genuinely can't tell from the way you're sitting." He laughed again. "In my opinion," she finished the dressing. I logged. Reyes, field dressing applied under post-contact adrenaline, tone controlled, made injured soldier laugh. The laugh is therapy. She knows that. He doesn't. Kowalski walked up to her when she was still crouched by Torres. I saw him coming, and I'll say, whatever I thought was going to happen, I was wrong. Which is a thing Kunar Province had been teaching me for 8 months, and I still hadn't fully learned. He stood over her. Look. Now was still breathing hard from the contact. His rifle was slung, and his hands were hanging at his sides in the open, deliberate posture of a man who has decided something. "That route you took," he said, which she looked up. "South shelf, up the drainage cut, flank approach on the second terrace," he said. "I've run that hillside 3 times. I never found that line." She held his gaze. "It was there," she said. Kind of, "Yeah," he said. "Plus, but I'm starting to understand what's there and what I missed." He wasn't talking about the hillside. She stood up. They were roughly the same height, which I don't think he'd registered before, or maybe he had and was registering it differently now. The unit was watching, all 11 of the unwounded, watching with the careful peripheral attention of people pretending to be focused on other things. Kowalski held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she shook it, not warmly, not coldly. Plus, with the professional acknowledgement of someone accepting what's owed and nothing extra, which is exactly the right amount. "Who taught you the line read?" he said. The pause before, she answered, was maybe 2 seconds. "My dad," she said. She walked back to help with Fass. Kowalski stood there for a moment. Then he turned toward Hutchins, who had been standing 6 feet away watching all of this with the focused interest of a man who already knows he's going to be telling this story for the next decade. "Who's her dad?" Kowalski said, and Hutchins told him. I didn't see Kowalski's face when he heard it. I was writing. But Hutchins, I think, told me later that the blood went out of it. Slowly, then all at once, the way it does when something you thought was one thing reveals itself to be something else, entirely, and there's no route around the recalculation. The medevac came at 15:34. Plus, the Torres and Faz were airlifted. Torres was joking about the dressing Reyes had applied, telling the flight medic she'd applied it like she'd personally invented bandages and wanted credit. The flight medic, who had no context for any of this, simply noted the dressing quality in their log and moved on. We drove the remaining vehicles back to Kilo in a convoy that was quieter than the one that had left. I sat in the TC seat of Vehicle 3 and watched the mountains come down into the valley. And I wrote. Not the tactical, to be fair. Summary. That came later, that had its own form, its own cold columns. I wrote the thing I actually observed. 6 minutes. She processed the contact faster than the contact happened. That is the only way to describe it. She didn't react to the ambush. She moved through it laterally. Yeah, like someone who had been told the ambush was coming and had planned accordingly. She hadn't been told, which she had simply been taught, in a way that made the preparation indistinguishable from instinct, so that by the time she needed it, it was already muscle. That isn't talent. Talent is accidental. That is someone's deliberate work, applied to a person over 20-plus years on the assumption that the person would someday need it. Her father knew she'd someday need it. To be fair, she's here. She, to be fair, needed it. And it worked. That night, Doherty called the platoon together in the staging bay. No ceremony. Doherty doesn't do ceremony. He does accountability, which in his hands is a kind of ceremony stripped of everything. Decorative until only the functional thing remains. He went through the contact, route. Positions, which response. Actually, outcome. Then he paused. PFC Reyes identified and neutralized the western fire point, he said. TBH. Under contact plus, independently, basically without order. The tactical read that made the difference was hers. He didn't say good job. He didn't say, I'm proud of you. He didn't say the things people say in those situations when they want to make an emotional event feel earned. He said, note it, which in Doherty's language means, this goes into the permanent record of what this unit's done and who did it, and it stays there whether anyone is watching or not. And Reyes was standing in the second row. She said, I guess. Yes, Sergeant. Nothing more. Kowalski, from the back of the room, said nothing. But he wasn't looking at the ground. Later, 2,300, maybe later, the night had lost its edges by then. I found her sitting outside the wire on the approved perimeter bench. All which isn't inside the wire and is technically a point of vulnerability that Doherty tolerates because some people need 5 minutes of horizon and there's no regulation governing the human need for a place to put their eyes that isn't another person's face. She had her notebook open. I have a notebook. She had a notebook. I sat down on the other end of the bench, which was far enough away that I wasn't intruding, close enough that I was present. We didn't speak for a while, and then she said, he kept a log, too. I didn't ask who. Every deployment, she said. He'd read them to me when I was a kid, the ones he could read to a kid. He had a, in my opinion, version for each age, like a different edit of the same footage. She looked at the mountains. I always wanted the full version, she said. He never gave it to me. She closed the notebook. Think I'm writing my own now, she said. And I thought about the thing I'd written on the third day. She's either the most disciplined soldier I've seen in 4 deployments, or she's performing discipline. I'd been wrong about the or. Plus, it was both, all the way down, and the discipline was the man who'd built it. And the performance was the proof that it had held. And she was sitting here on a bench in Kunar Province at 2300, making the first entries in a log that would outlast this firebase, this deployment, probably this war. I opened my notebook. She looked over. What do you log? She said. Everything, I said. She nodded. Me too, she said. We sat there for a while longer. The mountains were dark and very large and not concerned with any of this. I wrote, Day 6. She's going to be here long after. They've stopped underestimating her. The question is what she does with it. I think I know the answer. I think her father knew the answer before she was born. I don't know if that's beautiful or heavy. Maybe it's both. Probably it's both.